What's up, guys? It is Super Bowl 57 week, so how better to prepare than by going through some scheme? This video, we're just going to talk about what the schematics will look like when the Eagles are on defense and the Chiefs are on offense. What kind of plays are they going to run? What kind of formations are they going to run? And who has the advantage? If you don't want to watch 10, 15 minutes of me breaking down exactly how that's all going to play out, hit like, leave a comment, and maybe even subscribe. If you do that, I'll tell you real quick right now. The Chiefs have a little advantage, and Andy Reid with 2 weeks to prepare is a menace. But the Eagles do run a really good defense. And even though it's pretty simple, most defenses are pretty simple, they have a really good shot at taking away some of the things that Patrick Mahomes does best, including, but not limited to, that deep shot. Without any further ado, let's get into some scheme. Now, there's going to be about 60 plays on each side of the ball in this game, so there's a lot of different variations in what teams are going to do, right? The Eagles are probably going to run 30 different plays out of 4 different formations on defense, and that's being pretty conservative, right? Their defensive coordinator, Gannon, is a really creative dude, but everybody's got a base defense, right? And a base defense, the reason it's called base is because let's say theoretically you just can't get a call in, right? Like the Chiefs go hurry up, catch the Eagles off guard, and the Eagles don't have time to call a play. You revert to running base. Every defense has a base. The Eagles' base is actually, it's a little odd. Their base defense is effectively out of dime, and they run cover 4. Now, typically a base defense is a 3-4, so 3 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers, or a 4-3, 4 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers. But the Eagles are a forward-thinking, analytical organization. They realize that the way to win football games is to pass the ball because it's so efficient. So, if that's the way you win, the way to beat it, the way to win against winners is to stop the pass. And that's exactly what the Eagles are geared up to do. Now, what is dime? Dime is when you have one real true linebacker on the field, and then you make up for it by having 6 defensive backs. Now, typically that looks like 4 corners and 2 safeties, but there's a lot of variation, and in the Eagles' case, their base dime alignment actually has 3 safeties because they kick Chauncey Gardner-Johnson from safety down into the slot. This is actually a really big advantage for them because Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is a pretty decent cover corner, like out of the slot. Obviously, you can't line him up outside, but out of the slot, he's a pretty decent cover back. And he's also, because he's a strong safety, much better against the run than your typical slot cornerback. This helps them stay versatile, and it prevents them from getting gashed by the run when they're in their base dime defense. So they also run cover 4, I mentioned, and this is what cover 4 looks like. This is the new age. This is Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley, Ed Donatel did it in Minnesota, but we're not going to talk about that. And obviously Jonathan Gannon runs it. This cover 4 is built to take away deep passes, right? And you'll see that here. This is a really good example of cover 4 because it doesn't look like the diagram, right? The diagram makes everything really clean and everybody's running all these fanned out, very simple coverages, but in reality, things get funky, especially when you've got Taysom Hill as your X receiver here, and you've got motion by this number 83. I think that's their tight end. Yeah, it's Juwan Johnson. So as you can see, nobody moves. It's cover 4, and this is actually very funny because I mentioned earlier, the Eagles basically play dime and nickel. And this play looks like 3-4 base, right? It looks like you've got 3 defensive tackles, here, and you've got 2 outside rush linebackers in 48 at the top of the screen and Hassan Reddick, number 7, at the bottom of the screen. Well, if you're an Eagles fan, you already know 48 is not a rush linebacker. 48 is a safety. So you've actually got 3 safeties, 2 linebackers, and 4 defensive linemen with 2 outside cornerbacks. That is regular old nickel. Now, this would look a little different if the game was played today because Chauncey Gardner-Johnson would likely be this outside linebacker or one of these safeties. He was injured in this Saints game. Regardless, let's run the play. As you can see, it's pretty much cover 4, base, just like I told you. You're going to have that quote-unquote linebacker, that faux linebacker, turn back into a safety and run coverage on the tight end. You're going to have Darius Slay at the top of the screen go way deep, typical cover 4. And you're going to have those 2 safeties take the middle quarters of the field, deep, right? Because remember, cover 4, you're splitting the deep area into fourths. If this was cover 3, number 32 Blankenship would be running towards this sideline because they're playing thirds. He's not. There's a reason. Because the play is funky, though, Bradbury goes across the field and kind of deserts his job going deep with Taysom Hill because you're not just going to leave him alone, right? So even cover 4, even very stock zones have foibles. They get funky. The coverage is perfect, and it results in a sack. 1, 2. Now that you know what you're looking at, let's see it one more time and just let it run through without the diagramming and the talking. Right? You can see where everybody went. This safety is guarding his third of the field. This linebacker is guarding his third of the field. And this linebacker is guarding his third of the field. Boom, boom, boom. They're short. They're covering the man. Because again, you're not covering space. You're covering a man in that space. You take whoever comes to your area. And you pass him off when you leave the area. Right? Bradbury realized there's nobody over here. My typical position is moot. I'm going to run over here and guard the player. That's smart. That's savvy veteran stuff. If you look at just what the diagram looks like, you've got 4 defensive backs, your outside corners and your safeties all going deep, which if you were trying to prevent somebody from throwing 4 streaks, let's just imagine that somebody is trying to play 4 verts like in Madden. This is pretty much how you would do it, right? Especially when you consider that Darius Slay is still a good cornerback and James Bradbury is a pretty good quarterback. But they're both in their 30s, and I think everybody will agree that they're not quite the players that they once were. Bradbury was really good a few years ago, and now he had a good year this year, but it's pretty heavily overrated by the scheme that protects him. Darius Slay was once a top 5, maybe top 3 cornerback in the entire NFL, but I think even Eagles fans will admit this year he's taken a little half step back. Typically, when cornerbacks get older, the reason that they fall off a little bit is because they lose a little bit of that quickness and a little bit of that deep speed. And cover 4 basically insulates them from that. Now, because the Eagles run those outside cornerbacks deep and they put those safeties over the top to help them, you've only got 7 defenders left. And 4 of them, on almost any given play, are going to be rushing the passer. Because the Eagles have such a great defensive line, they rarely blitz. I mean, not rarely, but they don't blitz nearly as much as a lot of other teams. And when they do blitz, it's usually more of a simulated pressure where they're still only rushing 4, they're just rushing them from different spots. Either way, this means that about 8 of the 11 defenders on any given play for the Eagles are as far from the middle of the field as they could be, right? You got 4 defensive linemen trying to get into the backfield and 4 defensive backs going as deep as the deepest receiver. That means you have 3 dudes who are in charge of everything between 5 and 20 yards downfield. Now, this is by design, right? You've prioritized stopping the deep pass, preventing the chunk play. And in order to do that, you give up those smaller plays. That's why Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Avonte Maddox are going to be so key. I know PFF is really high on TJ Edwards, and this graphic displays that, but frankly, I don't agree. I don't think TJ Edwards is a great linebacker. I think he can be a serviceable linebacker, and I certainly don't think that he can handle the likes of Travis Kelce or, God forbid, a wide receiver like Juju Smith-Schuster. So just based off of what I've told you, you can tell that the weakness of this defense is going to be these green voids here, right? It's going to be anything short, especially if you use an MVS to stretch the field, and frankly, quarterback runs. Now, I know Patrick Mahomes was hurt a month ago, literally a month ago. The Jaguars game was a month before this game, right? And we saw Patrick Mahomes look pretty damn healthy against the Bengals. It gets another 2 weeks to rest. I'm sorry, I don't think that Patrick Mahomes is injured at all in this game. On this side of the ball, it's really going to come down to how do the Chiefs attack these areas. Now, it's difficult for me to show you what kinds of plays the Chiefs like to run on offense, right? Because there is no base offense. Maybe halfback dive, but Andy Reid doesn't play that shit. Instead, I can just show you some examples of plays that would, theoretically, be very effective against this kind of a defense. Cover 4 is really useful, and most of the best defenses in the NFL use it these days. But there's still a ton of holes to exploit. In fact, they're actually pretty easy to exploit. It's just that you don't get a lot of chunk yardage. So where are they? Well, the first 2 are right out here because you'll see these cornerbacks on the outside are going deep. So as long as you preoccupy the cornerbacks and give them a reason to run deep, you can throw these shorter passes to the flat all day. You can do that by sneaking a running back out like this,
or a tight end, or even on the bubble to your slot receiver. The next two that are going to be exploitable are in between the linebackers here and here, right? This is very similar to in cover two. Anytime that there's a mesh point in a zone, you're going to have a hole there. Because you've got Avonte Maddox and TJ Edwards, you're going to try to find these bubbles rather than the one between Gardner Johnson and Edwards. But you have an advantage either way, right? Because it's a communication issue rather than a talent issue. And Gardner Johnson's really good. He's really savvy, but anybody can make a mental mistake, and it takes two people making the correct mental play to properly execute a pass off in a void. Finally, you've also got these bubbles out here in between the cornerback who's going deep and the linebacker who is trying to cover, or the slot defender who is trying to cover this second level. These are a little tougher to hit, but still very doable. So what kind of plays can we run to get to these green zones that I'm showing here? The easiest way to do it is just to go right at these two linebacker bubbles and run like a mesh route, right? So you've got either a tight end or a slot receiver and their corresponding slot receiver kind of crossing over the middle. And you can still do this with the outside receiver, but it takes longer and it's not as effective, right? And then you just try to hit them as they mesh when both of these slot defenders are passing off their receiver to this linebacker, right? So the linebacker is overwhelmed. He's got two receivers that he probably can't cover, and the corners that are playing the slot, or, the defensive backs that are playing the slot, are in limbo because it's no longer about are they good enough to run with this dude. It is now about have they properly communicated and cooperated with their teammates, and cooperation's hard, man. Anybody who's ever tried to kiss their girlfriend and accidentally bumped noggins knows that even when you're totally on the same page, working with two people can just be messy. Another really good way to beat this is to run an inside-out concept. So you're going to try to run these defensive backs deep, because remember, if they don't have a reason to run deep, they're not going to run deep. And all of a sudden you're manned up and your play doesn't work. So you need somebody going deep to take away the shallow coverage, and then you run something under it. So in this case, we're going to have Travis Kelce run kind of a seam corner route, right? Kind of sneak up the seam and then get to the corner. And that kind of preoccupies Gardner Johnson in this play because he's going to carry with Kelce, and then he's going to pass it off to Slay, who's getting deep, to make sure that Kelce doesn't get over his head. Then you can just run Valdez-Scantling in this play on a little out, especially a little hitch out, so it looks like a curl, but it breaks out afterwards. Really simple, and that's a great way to get 5-10 yards. This is something that the Chiefs are going to do a lot of. It's called an option play. Smith-Schuster will do this from the slot a lot as well, but they're going to run a curl. But they have the option to turn it into an in, and they have the option to turn it into an out. And it totally just depends on where that slot defender is going. And because there's only 3 of them, there's a really good chance one of them's wrong. And if they're wrong, this receiver is now wide open. Because let's say Kelce runs a curl and then wants to turn it into an out. If he sells it and Gardner Johnson turns it into an in, there is nobody to cover Kelce, right? Especially if you run the cornerback off by having Valdez-Scantling go like this or anything deep. Finally, you've got the eternal zone beater. It'll beat any zone, floods. How do you run a flood with this? Well, it's actually a play that the Chiefs adore running. You take your slot receiver and you make him a speed guy. So I don't care if you pull, Justin Watson, number 84, big, tall, white guy, 6'4", track speed, came from the Buccaneers. Really good talent. Not a great player just yet. Maybe he develops, maybe doesn't. Either way, he's fast. So I would personally take Valdez-Scantling, your preeminent deep threat, and run him on either a sluggo or some kind of a crooked seam route to try to get him deep, and then run this slot receiver on the other side on a deep over or like a deep post to try to get both dudes lined up on the same safety. In this case, we would be zeroing in on Blankenship, who is an okay backup safety, who is better in the box than he is in coverage. And now I've got Valdez-Scantling, a true burner with great size and speed, running deep over his head. And at the same time, I've got Justin Watson in this case, a true burner, but Kadarius Toney can do this as well. Any receiver can really do this. Also running back the other way over Blankenship's head. So as long as you stay in that quarter of the deep field, and Mahomes has the arm strength and the accuracy to do that, you're going to have one of those two open. Right? And then obviously the short routes will be open as long as you have deep players. So you can run a lot of concepts that also beat cover 2, where you can run like a cloak and dagger play right here. Run Smith-Schuster deep, and you have Toney come and run a little curl under it. A hitch and go. Boom, dagger, done. Or you could do the same thing, but now Toney runs an out. or Tony runs a stop and go. Lots of things, but basically just one dude goes deep and one dude goes short. You create yourself a lot of opportunities, and because the middle of the field is being split into thirds, there's more space to operate.
So, real quick summary, the Eagles are going to try to take away that deep ball option, and that's going to leave a lot of space in the middle for the Chiefs to do crazy shit. And Andy Reid with 2 weeks is probably the single best person to take advantage of all that space down low, right? And so Mahomes is known for the deep ball. That's what makes him special, that and the running around in chaos. But he's a good quarterback, and almost any quarterback can hit these middle of the field, pretty wide open passes. So look for Travis Kelsey to get like 10 targets, I mean, minimum. They're going to be working him on option routes a lot, anything small and over the middle, trying to take advantage of the fact that the only people there are a linebacker who's not so good, and then two slot corners who are fine, but not great cover players, and certainly not good enough to match up with Travis Kelsey, much less big enough. Additionally, I expect a lot of gadget stuff from Kadarius Toney, a lot of bubble screens, a lot of tunnel screens, just getting dudes open short and letting them work with the ball in their hands. I don't expect the Chiefs to see so many of their hallmark long balls work, but I do think that they'll be able to run some flood concepts like I showed in the video with Kadarius Toney or whoever they want to run out of the slot, running a deep route over the top to meet up with a streak and just confuse the deep defenders. Again, like I said in the beginning of the video, slight advantage Chiefs. I don't think that this is a particularly awesome matchup for the Chiefs, but if it's a normal matchup for the Chiefs, they're really good on offense. And this is a slightly better than normal, maybe even significantly better than normal matchup for them. So they're going to not going to quite have their druthers, but they're going to have a lot of options, and I think they'll be going to be pretty successful. Stay tuned because I intend, if I have time, to do the same video but flipped. So, what are the Chiefs going to do on defense, and how are the Eagles going to try to combat that? And hopefully, by the end of the week, I'll get to some personnel matchups. Till then, I'll be grinding film. Hasta.